I'm Jennifer Betit Yen with the Film Lab, and welcome back to Elevating Women in Entertainment. Today, we are ecstatic to have with us Daniel Sakaya, the President and Chief Operating Officer of Crossings TV. Daniel brings with him a background in marketing strategy, business development and entrepreneurship, and his experiences include various startup launches, corporate restructuring and initiatives, partnership management and development, as well as brand equity and awareness building through both strategic and grassroots approaches. Daniel's a graduate from the University of Florida, and he holds an MBA from the University of Notre Dame. Let's get into it. Well, Daniel, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
So just to start, could you give our viewers a little bit of background about yourself and about Crossings TV?
Sure. So I'm Daniel Sakaya. I'm the president and COO of Crossings TV. Crossings has been around for over a couple of decades now. I've been here for maybe the last 12 years or so. And it's just been an exciting and challenging 12 years, and Asian media is it's its own beast, with its own challenges. And I think that's really what we're always trying to do here, and trying to be a little bit unique in that we're trying to, really grow more nationally, really get more support for Asian content, Asian media, Asian productions on a bigger scale.
As a leader in multicultural media, specifically Asian-driven media, how do you ensure that women, particularly women of color, Asian women, Asian American women, are not just represented on the screen, but also empowered behind the scenes and at the executive table?
I think there's a couple things. One is, we have a very diverse staff. I think probably more than half of our staff are female at this point. But we really, anytime we spot out the talents, we want to mentor that talent. We really want to advocate for it. So we've done that with a lot of folks internally, some of them, some of the women here, and really kind of empower them to develop the skills, the tools, and have the opportunities, to really, develop, activate those, but also get out there, right, and really kind of get exposed. We also, one of the things I think we ran into a few years ago is, because we tend to have the majority of our workforce in their late 20s to kind of early 40s. At one point we kind of acknowledged this is a time where a lot of people are building families. And so, we realize a lot of the kind of systemic challenges that women specifically have out there, maybe with maternity leave and things like that. So we did a lot of analysis on different benefits and created our own, supplemental programs on top of whatever, the state governments may provide, and provide our own additional paid leave, to everybody, including women, so that they can, have that support, through that time. I've recently had a kid, so I know that's particularly challenging, for the mom and things like that. And that's a lot of what we look at, is not just the mentorship component, but we really kind of view it through the lens of, it's our responsibility as the leaders of the company to make sure we have the right conditions and circumstances, right, for people to thrive. And part of that comes down to a lot of the benefits and the supports, that they get inside and outside of work, so that they can have that continuity, not feel that pressure, that whatever may be happening outside of work, would become a barrier, right, to what's happening here.
I think that's phenomenal. And it's funny because back in the day when I used to work for a law firm, one of the things that the women asked for over and over was for daycare, for help, for subsidized on-site daycare. And we never got it, but we offered study after study to show that if you do that, for law firms specifically, that if they offer this subsidized daycare, that productivity vastly increases, that women stay on, they don't leave, that it's actually a real financial benefit for the firm to do it. But it is an initial outlay of cost. And so I applaud you for actually doing it, and not just doing it because you were begged, but because you wanted to, and that was important to you. Can you talk a little bit about the specifics of that supplemental program, if there were any sort of highlights or things that you learned that surprised you and how you addressed them?
When we developed it, originally we were really kind of a California-centric company, and so people would get a lot of the benefits of the California state programs. As we started to become more hybrid and more remote, and now we're fully hybrid and remote, we realized that a lot of the women, in particular in other states, right, would not have these benefits. A lot of states have no benefits, no paid benefits at least. And so, so we put that together. I believe it's somewhere like 6 or 8 weeks of paid leave, that we do in addition to whatever you may get, from your own state, right, jurisdiction that you're in. And so that was one of the components was, just to make sure that in a lot of, leave that you see out there just kind of protects the position, but you go without pay or having to use your vacation and things like that. So we wanted to remove at least some of that financial burden, right? As much as we could afford, for a small company our size. But the other component that you kind of brought up with daycare was really kind of a big catalyst for us going fully remote. Even before we had done so, we worked really hard to break the notion of the 9 to 5 schedule and really get our team to adapt to a flexible mindset and really this sort of productivity in 8 hours myth, and just dispel that myth and say, just do the high impact work. That's really what we're looking at. And, we have our certain meeting times, we want you to be available for, but otherwise it's on your own time. And it's just about what life demands you have, whether that's childcare, things like that. It could be a personal preference. I mean, some people love waking up at 6 and working then, and some
Who
people.
are these people? No, I'm just
Oh, I know. We have a couple. And it's crazy. And they would feel like, oh, but I still have to go till that 5 p.m. time. And it was like, no, you absolutely do not have to work, 12 hours, 11, 12 hours this day. And then other people that would just prefer, they're night owls, they like to log in at 9 p.m. Maybe that's their quiet time at home, right? That they kind of get to kind of do deep work in that kind of thing. And so, it was a lot of that. And that was, the intention was really to get people to work at their optimal times while still having overlap parts of the day for meetings and things like that. But we saw that actually one of the big benefits that people were reporting out of it was just the flexibility with childcare, with errands and things like that. You didn't have to negotiate between your work start time and the drop off time, right, at school and that kind of thing. And so you could kind of work around that. And so, in the last, I think, 8 years or so, we've had a number of folks that became parents, right, at Crossings, and they've all reported that just the ease they have with that flexibility of being able to do that and take care of their kids, their drop off and things like that, and not feel like work is going to be a barrier to that.
sounds like it's actually turning out to be a gender neutral benefit, that men are
Yes.
benefiting, women are benefiting, everybody's benefiting.
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of times we have some folks where the woman, right, is kind of the sole worker in the house or the primary, driver of the income, and so that's kind of works both ways.
And from the perspective of production companies, particularly small production companies that may be on a budget, what advice would you give them if they are looking to, if they're concerned, they're like, hey, that sounds like a model we'd love to follow, but how do we provide this extra paid leave and ensure that, the job is done, that the work gets done, and that we don't lose a tremendous amount of money. What advice would you give from sort of the company perspective?
I hear this. I mean, I've had to spend years now defending our remote setting, and some of our benefits to some of the board members or shareholders and things like that. But I think from the financial standpoint, it's a work product. It's not a time in, time out thing, right? And if you're having an issue where your financials aren't viable, then there may be some misbudgeting or something like that, or you may have unproductivity, which is a separate topic, right? Than remote work or flexibility or things like that. So really, the solution there is finding people that really are going to be truly inspired. Number one, to whatever project you're doing, to the work that they're doing, and then two, have a high degree of accountability and integrity. And it's harder because that will sort of narrow down the window, right, of maybe candidates that you have potentially available. But we grow slowly because of that, because we go through a very rigorous vetting process, because we choose not to kind of micromanage to that. We'll never be able to control, those types of things, and better things just happen, right? The other way around. So I think that's definitely one of the things. The other things is, I know everything in this industry, and this is probably the main thing I try to communicate to like the filmmakers every year during mentorships, is that there's an entire web and chain of interests, right, flowing through it. And it's kind of understanding those interests and managing to those different interests. And so a lot of folks, you make certain decisions, and I understand it's very difficult, right, when you're this space where there's more supply than demand, right, for the most part, right, for production and content and things like that. But when you make a choice, when your side of the chain is pushing for you to get a project done in a third less of the time, and you're just sitting there and you make that decision on a whim, like, yes, I will do that, I will do whatever it takes, right? You have to understand every impact that has down the chain, and this is one of those impacts. Like, you're not going to be able to have people take breaks. You're not going to be able to have people work actually, regular viable hours. Like, you're going to be under stress, you're going to be in anxiety, right? Like, this, you're making this decision as a leader, and then you're imposing that decision on everybody else. And as a product, that's going to severely limit the kind of talent that you can get, right? And that's where people, a lot of times, they say, okay, well, yeah, then I end up being able to get a bunch of, inexperienced, like early 20s folks, men and women, right? Because they don't have these commitments, right? And things like that. But when you want to get, people that maybe have a decade of experience, guess what? They most likely have kids, they have families, they have other things, right? And so we always account for that, because we get those pressures, we get those timelines, and we learned the hard way when we were putting our teams through that. When advertising clients would come for a creative and push and say, well, I need this done in like a week less and things like that. And then we just saw the effects, right, that it would have on the team. And we got away with it because most of our team at the time were in their like mid 20s. Most of that same team's still there. Now they're like in their mid 30s or kids.
Yeah. So, in terms of the creatives themselves who might be looking to work at a company like Crossings, what would you suggest they look for if they are, looking for a model like that? What kind of questions should they ask?
If they're looking for this kind of model, I think, maybe one of the key questions would be to ask, and I say this to everybody interviewing, that it's a two-way interview, right? And I think most people kind of neglect this part of it, meaning you're being interviewed by the company as much as you're interviewing the company to make sure that it's going to work for you, right? Because and we appreciate when people do that and they have a lot of questions and things like that. So that's usually a first red flag, is if you have a lot of questions and they don't like that and they're getting bothered by that, they don't understand that this is of the arrangement, and they don't understand that it's a relationship, right? So to me, that's kind of a red flag. But once you're in there, I would definitely ask, what kind of, conditions do they set up for people to succeed? A lot of companies will spat this out and say this, but, can you break it down for me? Like, what are like 3 or 5 things that are actively happening right now that, you find are really empowering people to succeed, whether that's clarity and visibility, that's accountability, that's alignment, that's benefits programs, or whatever it may be. That would be kind of like the key questions, I would say.
In terms of choosing your content, are you taking into account, oh, do we want content that either supports or reflects gender parity? Are we trying to get content that presents, for example, strong roles for women? Or are we just sort of more focusing on what do eyeballs want to watch? Are we marrying those two? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Oh, that's a great question. Um, wow, that's a big one. So, I think it's really important for folks to understand, like the Asian content, or I'll say the Asian American content landscape is super early. It's in its infancy right now, and so we sort of live at the heart of this economic, dynamic space to figure out, okay, you need these eyeballs to monetize this content to then support this next piece of content, right? And we're early in that space where and so when you're early, you tend to have to stick to things that people are already habituated into, that they're familiar with. So we use a lot of overseas contents, or we'll use a lot of like news from here, or even API films. It'll be things that we know people already like, right? Or they have good ratings and things like that. When our goal is really to like blow that up, right? Because I think once you get enough support behind it, and really initially, I think one of at least this is my opinion. So this is purely my opinion. It could be 100% wrong. Is it doesn't happen on the film side. It doesn't happen on the theatrical side. It happens on the TV side because it has to scale up, right? Like the film side, it's so big. The budget, they're so high risk, these portfolios of films that they have. And they're so, contrary to what a lot of people think, they're extremely risk averse,
Yeah,
which is why we keep saying the same storylines,
over and
the
over.
same types of people, right? Cast over and over. And anytime there's something like slightly controversial, right, then everybody like goes crazy, right? It's so different, right? We were just talking about this with Sinners, right? And it
Oh,
was like these aren't necessarily like new things, and it was a great film, but like the media is going crazy about it, like, oh, because it's a multicultural film, and is that going to succeed, and blah blah blah, right? We're like already reacting strongly to that, right? So there is like this habituation that I think happens. I think it happens maybe a little bit more effectively, a little bit more seamlessly, like in TV. Episodic things, more niche things. TV has like spaces, right, for some niche type of things. But that's what we'd hope to see, is that we then can start to fund this habituation, right, of those things, and really start to see things that, I mean, it sounds so ridiculous to say, but it's like seeing Asian female in actual like empowerment roles, right? Which like everybody's so shy against, or Asian males in romantic lead roles, which you like never see,
never
right?
see. Right.
Yeah, so that's the other side of the parity, right? That we know, like it's so obviously not there. And if you live anywhere like New York or LA or San Francisco, where you just see Asian people around, it's just this gap, right? Like you see Asian couples walking around the street, but you don't see that on the screen. Like
On
you
the
just
screen at
don't.
all. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of like going back to Sinners. I loved Sinners. Like going back to that film, there was a lot of talk about the Asian couple in it.
Yeah.
And like, wait, there were Asian people in the South? And yes, there were, and this thought about how we just sort of get, all of us kind of get whitewashed out of all the stories. And then the stories are just expected to be only one group, forgetting, you know, how much intermixing there's been since the beginning, and it's just getting more and more and more in terms of multiculturalism, in terms of diversity, although there are so many other things we could talk about with respect to the arts and diversity right now, but I know we're running short on
Right.
time, so I'm just gonna tease that one. But the last question I have for you is, what advice would you give to other male executives about becoming genuine allies in terms of advancing gender equity, not just in terms of hiring, but just everyday decision making?
I think whether it's racism or prejudice or gender bias or things like that, it's painted a certain way and people have a certain idea of what it is. And it's actually something a little bit different in reality. And I think because people don't realize that, it can continue to pervade. And people think it's this very sort of intentional or angry thing, like we kind of see, and it's usually portrayed, and that does exist right out there, but that's usually what the media or even entertainment might fix on, right, characterizing out there. But really, where it's happening, I think, most of the time that I experienced it, in the workplace and things like that, is in this very subtle, habituated way
Yes.
that people don't realize that
Yeah.
they're doing. And you're just like habituated in making decisions in a certain way, and you don't explore that, like you don't self-investigate. And so this is one of the things that, I always say, to me, like the number one reason why somebody can end up with a team that doesn't have a lot of, multiculturalism, or doesn't have a lot of gender diversity or women or things like that, is because people tend to want to hire somebody they feel comfortable with, or somebody they like. And ultimately, that's what they're gauging, like, oh, okay, they fit all the requirements, but hey, can I hang out with this person all day long, right? Well, if you're like a guy that just plays, I don't know, golf, or I don't do that, but sports, and hang out at sports bar, like you have to acknowledge, like that's your habituated pattern, right? And that's active. Like when you're making that decision, and it takes a lot of self-reflection, self-analysis to understand that, and to know that, like you have to break out of your comfort. Like that's the thing. If you're looking around and this is the result, it's pretty homogenous, whatever way, right? It's homogenous. Like you have to break out of that in some way. Otherwise, you're just missing out on the diversity, right, of talent and creativity out there, and and it's range. And I think people, like, the number one thing you'll read in like business news or Harvard Business Review, and every business executive is obsessed with that, about, is innovation, right?
Yeah.
Creativity, innovation. And it's like, well, in order to see things you didn't see before, don't you kind of need to be around people you haven't been around before, right? And so, I mean, that doesn't click, right? Those
Right.
dots. And it's like, start hiring a diversity of folks to get a diversity of views, right? And input and opinions, and be very, very aware of that happening, right? And to me, it's not like, I don't have this thing of like, oh, you should hire a woman just for the sake of hiring a woman, or an Asian guy for the sake of hiring, like, a minority or anything like that. It's like, no, hire the best candidate, but fix the bias first and then determine who the best candidate is.
For sure. Yeah, wise words, self-awareness, accountability, exposure, and we all benefit. Well,
Yes.
Daniel Sakaya, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate your insights and your wisdom and all the
Yeah.
work that you do.
Thank you.